Rob, so thanks for coming to the session. I think people start trickling in. For folks who have not known Salsify, it's a Boston-based company. It's probably going to go IPO pretty soon, right? I think it's going to be an incredible milestone for the Boston community. Rob, so really excited to have you here. I think it's pretty exciting because you are one of the few founders who also remain like a CMO through the entire journey of the company from zero to like 100 million or ARR. So I think you'll have interesting thoughts in terms of how to build a company, but also be an interesting CMO over the journey. But for folks who have not known about Salsify, would love to sort of hear your thoughts on what Salsify is and why you're excited about the opportunity in the first place.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. Really excited to be here. Love what you're doing with Goldcast. Big space to work in. So at Salsify, we're building a commerce experience management platform. And what that means is that if you are a company that sells multi-channel, which I would argue today is everybody, then you've got a branding challenge of how do you represent your brands and your products optimally everywhere that they happen to be shown on the internet. Think of your Coca-Cola or your L'Oreal, or your Mars. You've got thousands and thousands of products, and they're shown on 1,000 retailers all over the world. These retailers are constantly mucking with the way that their search engine algorithms work, mucking with the way that their product detail pages are shown, experimenting with new ways to merchandise products, such as short form video and whatnot. And if you are a manufacturer, you've got to keep up with all those changes, and you've got to make sure that your products are more optimal than the competition's to win the search algorithm, to keep a high conversion rate, and to ultimately defend your brand and price point. So that problem that we've got now on multi-channel commerce management is a real problem that just about every company in the world has, and we've built a platform to help them win in that environment.
That's amazing, Rob. Rob, how does it feel to be a company that has hit the so-called $100 million ARR milestone? Is it like I'm sure it's a big milestone for the company as well, right? Like, what does it feel like to be on this journey?
Well, look, it's amazing for me. Yeah. There are some companies that maybe out of the gate are just crushing it from day one, right. And that was not the case for us. I mean, we started the company just over 9 years ago, September of 2012. And I had just gotten married literally 2 weeks earlier. My wife was still in medical school. And we just hit the ground running, just building product. And I spent a lot of the first year flying all over the country to meet with anybody who would spend time with me, manufacturers, retailers, distributors, just try to get a sense of the market, try to sell them early versions of the product, get users, just hustling. And over and over and over again, I heard that the problem that we solved was interesting. And there'd be somebody somewhere in the company that would love it. Like in a basement in a corner somewhere, the person managing the nascent Amazon business at a Johnson & Johnson or a Reckitt Benckiser, they might sit there and say, yeah, this is awesome that you guys are building. But none of them were taken seriously back then. I mean, e-commerce for a manufacturer in 2012,
new concept, right?
It was brand new, right? These companies were making like 0.1% of their gross on e-commerce. And it just, Amazon was not a threat to anybody in 2012, right? So this was kind of early days, and that what we were building at that time was a nice to have and not a need to have. And so we spent the first 2 years grinding out the business and getting a win on the board here and win on the board there. And it wasn't really until like around Labor Day of 2014 that things really started taking off for us. And what happened was effectively Walmart, Macy's, Dillard's, a handful of these companies started requiring complete product content to list product on the .com. And they started issuing penalties for companies that didn't have effective product content.
Interesting.
So all of a sudden, the problem that we had been working on for 2 years became a need to solve problem for companies that were selling through these major retailers. And, that everything has been great from there. So for me to go from, man, is this going to work, grinding it out for years, to where we are now is just incredible. I mean, it's hard to believe, but I couldn't be more excited.
That's awesome, Rob. Rob, so the first section I want to cover is basically your journey till the sub 20 million ARR, right? So I think when I think about it yesterday, so you guys had a differentiated insight that managing product content across retail is such a very difficult job for anyone, right? But still, it's a very it needs a behavioral shift from the person who's doing that to adopt a platform like Salsify, right? So I was wondering how you guys got the first 10, 15 customers in the first place. Like, where did you even start? Is it more like network, going after people you know, or what's the philosophy for the first 15, 20 customers you guys got?
Um, it's a mix of activities. So the very first customer we got was random. He's still a customer. Sibo
Wow.
over in England for a company
Yeah.
called Firelands. They just found us online, and we happened to be the first product information management system in the cloud. So if you were in 2012, early 2013, and you searched for PIM Cloud or Product Content Cloud or anything like that, nothing existed.
Hmm.
We were the first software there, even though we really didn't have that much in the
That's the
platform at that
product.
point.
Yeah, right.
We were still the only ones there.
Right.
So we had a couple folks like him that were early adopters trying to move to cloud software, find us and pay us. Most of them though came from just grinding it out. And so we had in the early days, our first sales guy was a guy named Mike Schumann, and we had a marketing guy named Steve Johnston, and I was running the go-to-market function. And what Steve and I would do is Steve and I would create lists of companies by category and then lists of contacts within those companies. So we would say the next 2 weeks is dental equipment manufacturing. The 2 weeks after that is automotive aftermarket parts. The next 2 weeks is personal care. The next two weeks is mass market beauty.
Wow.
The next 2 weeks is prestige beauty. You know, and we would create a list of all the manufacturers in North America within each of those categories, and then Mike and would take most of them and just pound the phone, just absolutely pound the phone. He could do 300 dials a day. And then,
Wow.
in parallel, Steve and I we'd carve off certain sections of these markets ourselves, and we'd be sending LinkedIn messages. We'd be sending emails, we'd be trying to personalize everything to try to get the best pickup rate. So it was just grinding it out to try to get conversations with anybody who would talk to us. And so the first, 15, 20 customers, every one of them was an early adopter personality, and almost every one of them had a slightly different use case. The first 15, 20, we hadn't hit product market fit yet. We hadn't hit that the repeatable use case that you can just, bang out. We really had, 15 or 20 theses that were starting by the 20th to converge around a theme. So for enterprise software, that market finding, what's that thing that you're going to be able to sell repeatably, message repeatably, price repeatably.
Yeah.
That's, within the first 15, 20 was really, market finding.
Interesting. But also, now I think about it, you guys are also in a very nascent category at that point of time, right? So you're getting the first 15 customers, but still people don't know about Salsify, right? Like, what exactly does Salsify do? So the brand awareness is still a tricky challenge to sort of overcome. How do you guys scale the company to the next 100 customers? Was it a combination of outbound? Like, what are the channels you guys use to get there?
I'm a big fan of the thesis from David Kellogg. David Kellogg was the CMO of Business Objects. He was the CEO of MarkLogic. He was, he's the CEO of HubLogic. He's been a multi-time CMO, multi-time CEO. His blog is Kellblog. I highly recommend it to all marketers. It's my favorite marketing blog. And so Dave Kellogg has a point of view that if you've got one marketing channel that works and one go-to-market sales distribution channel that works, then that's your channel. And just go hard on that one. Just scale that one as best as you can. So in the early days, we had built this outbound process for testing the market to just try to get conversations. Like you were saying, we're a nascent category. Almost nobody's searching for us. We were doing Google AdWords and whatnot from the beginning, and the volume was just really low because the category doesn't exist. The problem is not a need to solve problem. And so by the time that the product and the market converged and we had product market fit and things really started taking off, we had an outbound machine that was working and worked efficiently and could work at scale. And so for years and years and years, the primary growth engine for the business was outbound marketing, just classic outbound marketing. Now, over the last 2 years, we've diversified that, and we're getting to the point where outbound is actually a minority business at this point. We've crossed the line where upsells into the customer base are more important for us than new business acquisitions on a dollar basis. So there's things about the marketing mix that have changed a lot in the last 2 years. But for the first 7 years, outbound was the dominant form of company growth.
Wow, amazing. No, but I think more I think about it, I was chatting with someone the other day that every category we take is just well funded with bunch of competitors in every SaaS category, right? So it's becoming a little hard to differentiate, especially in crowded markets, even like us, for example, right? So was curious to understand, how do you think about brand for a company, and sort of what are the things that you guys did in the last few years to actually stand out from a Salsify's brand point of view?
I have a belief that the next 10 years of marketing is going to be defined by communities, especially for platformy companies. The last 10 years, I think, was defined largely by valuable content and thought leadership, the HubSpot inbound model, I think. And so one of the things that we did, which I'm very, very proud of, is a few years ago, we started a organization called the Digital Shelf Institute, which is separate from Salsify. It's got its own website, digitalshelfinstitute.org. It's got its own set of email addresses and the whole bit. And the reason that we did that is I had this belief that companies really wanted to come together to talk about digital shelf, to talk about, broadly speaking, e-commerce and digital execution, but none of them really wanted to do it in the context of a vendor. There were all these vendors that were trying to throw vendor events. And if you're Salesforce, you can do that. There's certain vendors that you're at a scale where you can do that. But if you're a subscale company, you're just another vendor. I mean, you look at Coca-Cola, how many whatever less than 500 million revenue software companies does Coca-Cola do business with? Just an uncountably large number, right? So if you want to stand out, you can't do so in a way that they perceive as investing in a vendor or giving back to the vendor, or if there's a give-get in there. And so what we did was we created the Digital Shelf Institute as a totally separate brand, totally separate organization that was community-led and driven. We actually created a board of directors for the DSI that were from the community. Think people with the title like VP of e-commerce or chief digital officer from major manufacturers. They define the rules of the organization. They commission the research reports from it and all that type of stuff. And so that organization is now, the Big Tent version of it has thousands of people in it. We've got an executive forum with senior executives from most of the largest manufacturers, and is really a iconic group for the market that we're in. There's a conference series, there's a virtual conference series, there's a podcast. It's just an awesome thing. So for us, that's a way that we stood out. We've stood out by creating a community where people can come together, where it's not about the vendor, where it's not about the product, where all it is about sharing knowledge between peers and trying to learn how to move forward in this new volatile market together with other people that are struggling with the same problems. And that for us has been very, very successful. And
it's very, very impressive, Rob. Amazing stuff. But I'm curious now, on the execution standpoint of view, like how do you guys get the first 1,000 members to be part of this community? Is it more like customers, hey, we are creating this community, would you be interested in that? Is that how it started in the first place? Or?
There's a book, I believe the author is Charlie Guo, called Unscaled, which is basically the philosophy is, don't worry about the first 1,000 members. Worry about the first member, the first 10 members.
Right.
And so by the time that we were doing this, we had hundreds and hundreds of customers. So and of those hundreds of customers, there's some that love us, and there's a lot that are just, yeah, Salsify is great, it's fine, and right. There's maybe a few that are unhappy at any given moment, right? So you've got hundreds of customers, and from those hundreds of customers, it's easy to find the first 20 that'll say yes, and that's all you need. You get 20, and you get them in there, and you experiment, and you don't want 1,000 to begin with, because you don't know what's going to be useful to these people, right? You want a set that's going to be forgiving and that's going to be willing to experiment and grow with you. So we started with 20, and we tested and learned with them. and tried a whole bunch of things out. And, they gave feedback. This works. This doesn't work. This works. This doesn't work. Why don't you do more of this? And we're very intentional about growing it slowly. It depends on the market that you're in. It depends on the type of company that you're in. I mean, we have over 1,000 customers now, but we're not a company that's going to have 100,000 customers. It's not the market that we're in. Yeah. So for us, we don't need to have communities that start off with 1,000 people.
Yeah.
We'd rather have 100 that are the right people that are really high quality. That's more important for us than 1,000. And 1,000 that are the right people that are high quality is more important for us than 50,000. So our podcast, for example, our podcast gets really nice downloads for the market that we're in, but it's never going to compete with Joe Rogan or the Tim Ferriss show. For us, we get an episode with a few thousand downloads. That's a few thousand people in our market who love us. And that's, we're really happy about that. So it's all about like right sizing where you are and being intentional about what winning looks like for the scale that you're at.
Yeah. So the incentive for the members, Rob, if I'm correct, is basically just value, right content, right value about the industry they are in, so that they don't feel like it's a sales pitch from Salsify, basically, right? Like that's the ultimate goal of the.
Yeah, we don't want. I don't think that marketing can be about sales pitches. It sort of depends on the product, but we're a new category. A lot of what we have to do, you said this earlier, is about change management, changing behaviors. Yeah. Oftentimes, org structures have to change around us, and you can't beat somebody over the head with the software and the value. Ultimately, a lot of the relationship comes down to trust and comes down to belief and comes down to faith, and you build those things slowly and you do it over time. And so for us to be investing in the community is one way that we do that. So it's like, not every marketing touch is about the next sales step. A lot of the marketing touches are about, and in some way, shape, or form, emphasizing that we care about you. We care about the market. We have a strong belief where it's going. We want to go there together. And that's it. And like, we don't need to have the sales conversation right now. Let's just talk about the future together. So that's how we square that circle.
On that point, there's a question that's come up. I love this question that Nick has sort of asked. How do you measure community ROI? Because I'm sure that like CMOs might be curious about like, hey, what's the benefit from the amount of money you put into this investment? And it's not very short term; it's a very long term play, right? So, would love to hear your thoughts on this particular question.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a very hard one. I'll tell you. At first, I said we're not going to measure ROI for this.
Yeah. Full
stop. We don't know what the ROI is going to be. I had faith that it was the right thing to do. We had models to look at. HubSpot had Inbound. Remember, there was inbounduniversity.org. It was a totally separate website back in the day. Zuora had their own community that was also separate. There's a few companies that have done something like this, some type of thought leadership thing that was on the side of the regular business. So we weren't the first to ever come up with the concept. And I thought, look, I think this is going to be really valuable. There's only a couple players that are in the space that are doing any thought leadership. There was Cleveland Research, which I thought was doing really nice work. There's Path to Purchase, which was starting to do some good work. But everyone I talked to in the space who would mention them would say, they don't really get all of e-commerce. They're more, you know what I mean? Like there was something missing about what those events were offering. Shop Talk had come up, and Shop Talk people saw as valuable mostly because it was the only place you could go to talk to other manufacturers about e-commerce, And so there was all these signs that people wanted a gathering point. And so at the beginning, I didn't measure ROI. I just said, let's just prove the thesis. Is there value in a gathering point here? Can we get people to come together? And the only metric that we were tracking was engagement. The people that sign up, do they come back over and over again? That's it, right? Now, once we did that, and that was the executive forum part of the Digital Shelf Institute. In parallel, we were also doing the podcast. And similarly, the thesis was people might come to be on the podcast that wouldn't do a blog post with a vendor. You could get the VP of e-commerce of a major manufacturer to be interviewed by something called the digitalshelfinstitute.org on a podcast called Unpacking the Digital Shelf. But, that same person from that same company would no way would they be able to get legal or press permission to go on a vendor's, like, the Salsify podcast, right?
Yes.
So at first with the podcast, same sort of thing. Can you get the types of people on the podcast that you think? Will anybody at all download it? Will you get any positive feedback at all from doing the first bunch of episodes? So at the beginning, there wasn't an ROI metric. There was just stand it up and test and learn and see if it works. Over time, the first ROI metric that I looked at was regarding how to justify investment in it to grow it. A lot of this stuff at the beginning was experiments that a few of us were doing as a side gig at Salsify. And how do we justify getting full-time people on these things? So the next thing I looked at was, is the material that is being developed as part of this community material that can be used for revenue marketing in campaigns, and therefore would reduce the cost overall of content creation for revenue marketing campaigns. And so we started looking at the videos, the research reports, the podcasts, the blog that Digital Shelf Institute was producing. And if those assets could be used as part of revenue marketing campaigns and perform well, then that would mean that I wouldn't have to invest as much in core content generation in the rev marketing machine, and I could defray some of that cost and put it back in the community. So that was the second metric that we were looking at as we were scaling. And you can develop from there. I mean, we're still on the journey ourselves, but I would say that if you spend too much time trying to justify every single dollar in marketing, you're going to miss out on opportunities like this, because sometimes the ROI is unclear.
Unclear, exactly. Well, there's one more question that I think when you mentioned about outbound stuff. So how do you think about outbound and account-based marketing in general, given your market would be dominated by a few whale customers?
Well, for us, we've got tens of thousands of manufacturers that are potential targets for the core platform that we've got, and then hundreds of retailers for the retail platform that we've got. So, even though there are some whales in there, the Johnson & Johnsons and Procter & Gamble's and Coca-Cola's and Dell's and whatnot of the world, there's still a long tail of lots of 100 million, 50 million, whatever manufacturers. And the way that we've done manufacturer sales, we really haven't done ABM even to this point. I mean, we're talking about doing ABM at a small scale for manufacturing for the first time in 2022. And the reason for that is, for a long time, we were selling a product that was we call it activation, where you get all your product content in one place, and then you could activate it in Walmart, on Google Manufacturing Center, on Amazon, on Home Depot, whatever. And that product activation problem was a problem that you could sell easily for $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 to a VP of e-commerce or a director of e-commerce at these large companies. So if we're going to go into a Coca-Cola, we weren't trying to sell Coke a $5 million software product. We were selling Coke a relatively, transactional product when we were first getting in there. Now our product lines have expanded. We now have an enterprise product information management system, which can command large dollars. We now operate globally, and operating multi-regions can command large dollars. Some of our customers have thousands of users, and that can command large dollars. So we've got customers that spend a lot with us now, but for many years we didn't. Okay. And if your ASP is $100,000 or less, you're not doing account-based marketing.
Yeah.
You're doing something that's more one to few or one to many in nature. So for us, we haven't done ABM. The only team at Salsify that's done ABM was a team that was part of an acquisition we made earlier this year out of France. The company was called Alchemix. The marketing team over there did ABM to French retailers. So they did account-based marketing to Carrefour, to Intermarché, to Leclerc, to Ensemble, to Metro, to those types. They had a small account list in FMCG, large retail in France. And they did legit ABM there. They would do things like fly a whole team of people over to China to look at Chinese retail together and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's a very different market. So that's how I think about the ABM side of thing. With regard to outbound, the BDR team will personalize some emails, but that's not really account-based marketing.
Right.
That's just good practice.
Makes sense, Rob. Oh, there's one more question. You can choose not to answer this. I don't know how detailed it is, but it's asking about your pricing strategy and did you decide to do a freemium play in the beginning of sorts?
Yeah, we had a freemium strategy for a while. We tried freemium for a few different ways. We had a demo that you could register for, where you could play around on your own.
Yeah.
We had stuff like that for a while, and we don't really do that anymore. It just the conversion from those events wasn't that strong for us. Ultimately, a lot of the problem that we solve is kind of complicated.
Yeah.
You think about it this way. Let's say that you're a reasonable sized company. You're a 500 million revenue manufacturer. You've got 1,000 products. There's a whole bunch of systems that you've got in place to do your product development. You might have a product lifecycle management system. You've got an ERP system. You might have a digital asset management system. You might be writing marketing copy in Google Docs. You might, who knows? Like, your data is all over the place. So to really be effective at Salsify, to stand this thing up, you've got to first ingest data from all of these places. And part of the data ingest could involve transformation. And then once you get the data in the system, you got to organize it in some way. And then once you organize it, in order to get it to Amazon, there's another data transformation that you've got to do to fit Amazon's data model. And so there's all these steps that, if you're like an Excel power user or you're an IT professional, none of them are that difficult. But if you're, a standard e-commerce manager at one of the, our standard user, they're intimidating steps. They require training, they require education, they require handholding. You can learn how to do them, no question. but they're not things that you would have walked into the room knowing how to do to begin with.
Oh, that makes sense.
So for us, that part of how the software is deployed and used makes freemium not a great fit for us. So rather than freemium, we invest really heavily in customer success, in services, in partners, in support, stuff like that, in order to make teams successful. And I think if your product is maybe more intuitive to use, the problem space itself is less mathy and data transformational and data managey, or your people that you're selling to are more heavily IT. Think like a Datadog product that could have product-led growth through IT, or Twilio could have product-led growth through IT. Then you might be in a position where freemium might make more sense. But for us, we tried experimenting with it and just wasn't a great fit for us.
Makes sense. So the next section I thought I'll cover is hiring, right? I think one interesting sort of observation that I had was you guys had roughly around, I think, 580 employees, at least in LinkedIn, right? It seems like a very small headcount for a big, company of your size and revenue. So I was just curious because I was reading this book on Netflix strategy, right? So how the CEO of Netflix thinks about is that he was saying that I hire like exceptionally good candidates and pay them like higher than average market salary, but keep it very small so that the team can execute and move fast, right? So I was curious because it does look like a small employee count for a company of your revenue size. So I was curious how you think about.
Yeah, I what did LinkedIn say our employee count was?
It's 580, I think. Probably it's not right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not right. I mean, we're around 650 right now, so it's not.
It's still not for exactly right. So it's still not.
I mean, I'll tell you, it's a really hard question. I don't have a strong philosophy on what the right number of employees is. I think so much depends on the market that you're at. So, for example, I mentioned it before. The problem that we solve is in some ways it's a complicated problem. And so we have a larger CS organization than maybe other companies our size. And certainly we have a much larger CS organization than a lot of other companies in our space. And that's you look at our NPS scores versus our competitors. People love us compared to our competitors because we have a huge investment in customer success, and they don't. And that's, that can be expensive. So there's so much about, how to right size a team that depends on the type of product that you've got and the type of company that you've got. And it's hard to say there's a blank answer there.
Got it.
For us, we're at a scale now where part of the way that we do budgeting is Mary, who's our CFO, who's amazing. I love working with her. She will look at other IPO comparable companies. So she'll look at 20 enterprise SaaS businesses or that have IPO in the last couple of years that are B2B enterprise SaaS, and she'll look at their public documents on revenue per employee and margin and R&D spend and marketing and sales spend and like all this stuff that you can find that's publicly available. And we just sort of benchmark against that, right? So we don't run our business based on the benchmarks. In some cases, like R&D, we're way over the benchmarks. So we're not using them as law, but it gives us at least like a finger in the air. Are we in the ballpark of what's reasonable for a company growing at our pace at the scale that we're at? And then once we do that, and then we look at the growth rate, and we come up with a burn rate that we're comfortable with, and then we figure out what fits within that burn rate. So a lot of it is constraint driven based on what we're comfortable spending and how fast we're growing and how the business is performing. And then within that, it's really quite subjective. I mean, sometimes, there's some parts of marketing where I'm trying to drive efficiency, like how big does a content team have to be?
Yeah.
I love content. I mean, we produce really, really great content, but if you have one fewer content writer, that means that you can invest one more community person, right? You could do something else that might be unique from a market mix perspective. You might be able to start an executive program, something that's not proven. So there's some areas that we look to drive efficiency, like how few people can we have but still be world class. And then there's other places where sometimes just having more people makes sense. So in the, at Salsify, the cold calling team, the XDR organization that rolls up in marketing, and there we overspend. So there we have a larger team because we know that organization has higher turnover. And when they don't have higher turnover, having more meetings is not a bad thing either. Right? So in other parts of the organization, we're always a little over our skis on the people count. And it just, it's a mix like that throughout the company. So I know the Netflix deck and philosophy is an inspiring one, but I don't think, or in my experience, it hasn't fit that cleanly across every function at every stage of the company's development. It's not, I don't think it's that simple.
That makes sense, Rob. So we have someone who's coming to do a video question. I think it's Kelly who's, Hey, hi Kelly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Hi, Rob. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is a great session. I'm Kelly Cheng. I recently joined Goldcast as the head of growth. So my question for you, you mentioned earlier that in the early days of Salsify, you were hustling and grinding. I'm curious my question is more about focus. So at Salsify, you now have a very large portfolio of customers across segments like small businesses, enterprise. In the early days, how did you remain focused on customer segments, knowing that the sales motions are so different by segmentation? How were you able to approach that at the very beginning and not get distracted?
In the early days, we didn't worry about it. We casted a wider net just to see what worked and what didn't work. So, so some of the customer segments in the early days that we got, for example, that we don't really sell to anymore, include automotive. Automotive has this data modeling challenge where an aftermarket part might fit on only a specific year, make, model of a car. So you could look at let's say that you've got a part of a door for a Toyota Corolla. It might only fit on the 2011 to 2014 Toyota Corollas and only the ones with manual windows, right? Or something weird like that. And so there's this relational component to the way that the data is modeled that's distinct from any other market out there. Another market that we sold to early and we weren't a good fit for, and now we are, is apparel. So apparel has this color or pattern plus gender plus size mix where you could have. So let me give you an example. It's Crocs, right? So Crocs, the classic Crocs, it's really one shoe, but it's in a bajillion colors and all these sizes, and so it's one shoe, but it's literally thousands of sellable products, right? The size for yellow, whatever. And so that was something that our product didn't do well in the early days. And later, years later, we invested in it. And so in the early days, we were trying to get as many examples in the system as we could, so that we could understand where our sweet spot was, where we could expand the company fastest. So once we had that, and for us, it was the FMCG, home improvement, home goods, like those were and pet, like those were basically the original explosive categories for us. And then later on, we layered on things like apparel, footwear, some industrial supply, distribution, food service, other markets as the product became more capable. So I'd say, in the early days, it's the wrong time to be focused. The right time to be focused is once you figure out a mix of something that works. So once we knew that outbound for FMCG with Amazon syndication, Amazon, Walmart, Home Depot syndication in late 2014, like that was the mix. Shut down everything else. Go. You can come back to the other stuff later. So I'd say you focus once you get to that point where you know how to grow something aggressively. Before that, cast a wide net, understand the market, get data points. That's where you should be.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. Yeah. Rob, I think the other question I was thinking I want to get your thoughts on is the marketing team structure, right? Like, so I'm sure in the early phases you probably hired like a product marketing demand gen team. Like, so how does it scale so far? Is it completely different right now? Now you guys have reached a particular scale, and what's the difference in how the team is structured now?
We've had a few generations of marketing at Salsify. It hasn't scaled smoothly. I mean, we've had hard resets on different teams at different points in the company's history. In broad strokes, right now we have corporate marketing. This is brand, content, and so on and so forth. We have revenue marketing. We have community as a separate function. Now, community sometimes rolls up into revenue marketing in some companies. Sometimes you'll see part of it in brand. We break it out as separate because I think it's that important. And then we've got the growth team, which is product marketing, competitive analysis, international localization strategy, stuff like that. And so those are the four core functions at Salsify. And then it's also broken up a little bit internationally. So some of those functions are global and some of them are not. So for example, we've got revenue marketing is there's an American revenue marketing team, and then there's a French revenue marketing team.
Got it.
They share best practices, and there's a global best practice standard set out of the US, but they're two separate teams.
Interesting.
Whereas the global head of product marketing is out of San Francisco, and her boss, the global head of growth, is out of London, and that's a global function, right? So there's not like specific breakdown of product marketing America, product marketing Europe. It's shared out of the same function. So there's four core functions, and then some of those functions are global, and some of them are split by geography.
And the community team reports to you, Rob, or
yes?
How does wow, that's great.
Yeah,
interesting. Got it. Now, I think now you described about the scaling part, right? I think one common philosophy that I keep hearing is that sort of people don't scale as the company scales, right? Like some people are good for a $0 to $10 million sort of scale, and then some people are better for the other sort of scale. I think you have remained as CMO from the beginning till the end as a founder / CMO, right? So I'm sort of curious to know how you evolved as a person over this sort of fighting for first 10 customers to now like managing a big company of sorts. So how did you evolve as a person over this journey?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, the interesting thing is I haven't been CMO from the beginning.
Interesting.
I'll tell you my history is that I was running the go-to-market function while we were trailblazing and trying to find product market fit. Once we had product market fit, we eventually hired a head of marketing and a head of sales. And what I split off to do was to work on the retail network. So we've got this interesting component to our platform, which is that we sell a manufacturer's software, but part of the value of the software is that you can get that data that's in the software to Walmart. And that requires us to have some kind of a relationship with Walmart,
with the big
right?
company.
So The retail network has been key to the strategic success of Salsify. And it's also something that we felt that, especially when we were small, only a founder could really effectively do, because you're trying to go to Minneapolis and talk to Target, and you're like nobody. And Target's the top 10 global retailer, right? How are you possibly going to get this company to take you seriously? Right. So that was my full-time job. And then the head of marketing left in early 17, and I ran it for a year until we found somebody else. And then he left a year later. And then I mean, at some point we just didn't want to have that much more volatility on the team. And I've been running it since 2018. So the marketing, like I said, it's gone through a few evolutions at Salsify. It's gone through 3 different leaders. For me, I'd say that the number one thing in terms of my own personal development is to treat personal development as a really, really important objective. To always be thinking about, what am I doing well? What am I doing poorly? To be paying attention in meetings to when are the things that I'm saying effective versus ineffective, to asking people for feedback on not all the time, but every once in a while get a check-in to see, where I should be focusing. I spend a lot of time reading books, and I've read a lot of books on leadership, on personal productivity, on organization design and development. I don't just read the book, but I read the book. I take notes, and when I'm done with the book, I write down what I've learned. I try to take things from the book and I put it into practice. I've got friends that are in the company, like a Lee Feigenbaum or a Jeremy or a Josh Silverman, that are also working on personal development stuff of their own in various ways. And we'll talk about it. What's good presentation, what's bad presentation, what's effective communication, what's ineffective communication. Yeah. So I would just say that, it's the job changes substantially as the company changes. The people that you surround yourself with at $100 million and above in ARR is very different than the people you surround yourself at 1 million ARR. Mike Milburn is our president. We hired about a year ago. He was the chief customer officer of Salesforce. He was the GM of Service Cloud, which is like a $5 billion ARR. like Mike's a heavy hitter in the world of SaaS. So how do I not embarrass myself around Mike? So there is, you're surrounding yourself with different people at 100 million ARR. And so, if you're a founder, if this is your first time doing it, I was 30 when we founded the company. I'm 40 now. And you just got to understand that you have to scale faster than the business. And that's hard to do. And you have to set aside time to do it. And if you're not doing it, then you will fall behind, and people do. But we've got folks like an Ashley Stallings or a Josh Silverman, who, like me or like Jeremy, have been around for a bunch of years and have started as individual contributors and are now senior executives, and have scaled with the business. And that's a hard thing to do, and not everyone is successful at doing it.
Yeah, amazing. Rob, so I think on the topic of books, any books that you recommend that you really liked reading about leadership and marketing, especially that you would love to share?
I think Cal Newport's Deep Work is one of the greatest books ever written. I think James Clear's Atomic Habits is essential reading. I think if you look back at the classic books, I really loved High Output Management by Andy Grove.
The Intel, right?
Yep, the Intel CEO. The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker is one of the classics. The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Trout and Reese is completely outstanding. Wow. I don't know. That's just a handful. I'm reading all the time though, so those are just the ones that are popping through the top of my head. I think Deep Work and Atomic Habits are 2 really, really good ones. And then if you're early in your career, especially, there's a book by Cal Newport called So Good They Can't Ignore You, which is also, it's probably the best book on career development I've ever read.
Awesome. Cool. Rob, so I think we're coming to the end. Really, really appreciate you taking some time out. We can't wait to sort of, watch you guys do the IPO next year and sort of ring the bell and celebrate with you. So really, really thank you for taking the time out.
I would, keep my fingers crossed on our behalf, or keep your fingers crossed for us on the market being open and all types of stuff. You know, whether it's next year or the year after or whatever, we're looking to build a big business. Hopefully, like our friends Toast around the corner with their absolutely monster IPO recently.
Awesome, cool. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate you seeing me today, and then good luck.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Thanks, Rob. See you. Bye.